Thank the panelists so much for coming. Professor Margaret Russell, John Osaki, who's the film director, Dale MINAMI, and Warren FURUTANI, who drove all the way up here on his own dime to be here. So thank you so much. I think that we are going to get started. And afterwards, there will be a panel. So for about an hour is the film, and then after that, thank you so much.
Although President Reagan acknowledged that the incarceration of Japanese Americans was a mistake, he stopped short of calling it what it really was: a scandal of epic proportions.
Government lawyers intentionally destroyed and altered and suppressed evidence regarding the loyalty of Japanese Americans. Government lawyers also presented to the court false evidence regarding the commission by Japanese Americans of acts of espionage, acts that the government knew to be false.
It was covered up, but during my few years of doing research at the archives, I found the lost 10th copy of the DeWitt report.
The cases that legalized and legitimized the incarceration of these Americans was false. It was a fraud.
Today, more than ever, America needs to know the truth. They need to know that not only were Japanese Americans rounded up and incarcerated based on completely false information, but the government knew it, and these facts were deliberately covered up for decades.
It's time for this country to be reminded of the truth and that facts matter. They should have mattered in 1942, and they should matter today.
And including her husband, Jack, are really unsung heroes in uncovering what really happened to Japanese Americans.
I wanted to ask you how you felt when you found the final report and you realized what it is, like what was going through your head?
I think my head was about to bust. Because when I realized that it was this 10th missing report, I thought, gee, what are we going to do with it?
And for her to go through those reports line by line, word by word, and understanding the significance of what she found was amazing to me.
When we got a ruling from Judge Marilyn Hall Patel in Fred's case, the final report was one of the stated reasons why Fred's conviction was thrown out.
So Eichel's contribution in that one area was absolutely central, I think, to the winning of the coram nobis cases, and in a way to the whole redress effort.
I don't know that redress would have ever happened if that report wasn't found.
Well, I never thought about it that way. Let me think about it. Well, that's good. I'm glad to know that, that was... Sometimes it's being in the right place at the right moment.
She was also not just a shrinking, violent researcher type. She was assertive, and she was articulate. She testified in Gordon's case in Seattle. And in fact, the judge was so impressed with her and quoted her testimony in his decision.
You know that phrase, never again? Some of us who were in the Asian movement were carrying placards, and when we walked the streets of New York, never again. And I think it's up to us as former victims that if we see something wrong, we should say something.
myself earlier. My name is Adina Ishii. I'm a 1L here at Santa Clara Law School. I'm also an ACLU board member, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. And we have with us a really special panel. Dale Minami on the far end, who you saw very much know a lot about him already from the film earlier, and Warren Furutani, who is not only Aiko's son-in-law, but also a civil rights activist, a former assembly member, and also my uncle. So that's how we got him to come. And then Professor Russell, who is a constitutional law professor here. And also John Osaki, who of course is the film director. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful film with us. So one thing I just wanted to comment on before we get started is just to really recognize that we had so many different organizations that were co-sponsoring this event. And that was really intentional because this story is not just about Japanese Americans and the Japanese American incarceration. It really is about the connections between then and what is happening now. And we really wanted to make sure that that was clear as we were planning this event. And so you all have cards in front of you, I believe, and maybe some pens kind of dispersed throughout. If you have questions for our panelists, I have some prepared, but you can write your questions there. To start with is John, this is your film, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, why you made this film, what was the inspiration, and I think something that I really love is that you bring in what's happening now, and also you really cover a huge cast of characters, and I think a lot of people know maybe the specifics of what happened with Fred Korematsu towards the end, but not everything that led up to it. So if you can share a little bit about that, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for organizing today's screening. And thank you all for coming out here today on Fred Korematsu. I think it's great to see so many people out here today. And this film, kind of the idea for it really started in 2016. A couple of things happened at that time. One is that I was finishing up a short documentary about my children's pilgrimage to Tule Lake, where 3 of their grandparents had been incarcerated. And by the way, in case you didn't realize it, that very opinionated young lady in the film is my daughter. And so I was finishing up this short documentary, and so I thought, okay, before I finish it, I better really do my homework and do some additional research on the incarceration just to make sure that I had all my facts straight. Now, some of you may not know, so my day job is running a nonprofit in San Francisco, Japantown, and I've been working there for over 30 years. And so I always thought I had a above average knowledge of the incarceration story. But when I was doing research for this film, I came across a report called Personal Justice Denied, which is a report that was produced by the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians that ICO had done research for. And as I started going through this report, I was shocked. I was stunned at how much I didn't know. And all the cast of characters who were involved. And what really struck me at that time was, growing up, seeing the Civil Liberties Act passed in 1988, seeing my parents receive reparations, it never really dawned on me how deceptive this whole incarceration was. And so I thought that was a story that needed to be told. And about the same time, we were having an election in this country. And something happened that I never expected. And that was, supposedly educated public officials and political pundits coming forward and suggesting that the incarceration of Japanese Americans was not only necessary, but that it could serve as precedent for actions that might have to be taken against groups which are being targeted today. And it never dawned on me that the unjust incarceration of my family could one day be weaponized and used to justify oppressing other communities. And it was at that point I decided that I needed to do something about it. And this film was me doing something about it.
So I also want to encourage my panelists, if you have more information you want to share about yourselves, that's just a 2-second bio, so please feel free to share more information about your identity or anything that might help with the comments that you're making. I'd also like to take some time and just, minute and a half or so, your thoughts on this film. I think probably some of you have already seen it, but if there's any comments you have about it, I'd love to hear them. Whoever wants to go first.
We were involved in the coram cases, and I also thought I knew a lot about it. But after watching John's film, I got to see the backstory of James Rowe and Edward Ennis and the huge struggle and fight they had behind the scenes. I had read about it in general terms, but then to see the actual participants, relatives or sons, talk about it and the type of conflict they had over whether to incarcerate or not, I think was really spectacular. I also think using young folks in the film itself was really helpful because we can teach the old folks and many of them know things, but unless you bring in this information to the next generation, we're not going to make the kind of progress we need years down the line.
I had also seen the film already. I also write a column for the Rafushipo Japanese American community newspaper in Los Angeles. And the column I wrote after seeing John's film was that if we were going to go before the Supreme Court for the ultimate overturning of the coram nobis case, the Korematsu versus the United States, that our lead attorneys would be Dale Minami and Don Tamaki, and that the evidence that we would present would be John's film. Now, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce Aiko's daughter, my wife Lisa, and not only in terms of just the DNA, but you see Aiko with what Dale and others said about her in the last moments of the film is really true. Aiko was an absolute piece of work. An absolute piece of work. And I got to tell you what Dale said about her going line by line. The reason I want to point out Lisa, and I'm going to take some credit for it as well as her brother and so many other people, we're the ones that had to move the boxes, boxes. They're all over the country. And just a short story. They were in Washington, D.C., and then they lived in Virginia. And Lisa's from New York City, but when we met, she came west and we got married. But we wanted to get Aiko and Jack out to the West Coast. And we would talk to Aiko, and Aiko would say, yeah, I'm open to it, but Jack will never leave the East Coast. We talked to Jack, and Jack would say, yeah, I'm open to it, but Aiko will never leave the East Coast. So we got them together to talk. And we decided to move, except there was a huge problem. And the huge problem was in the basement of their condominium complex, which was monstrous, was all of these file boxes. I think it was 125 file boxes. So luckily UCLA's Asian American Studies Center and the university took the file boxes, so they brought a whole freight truck, a whole huge container to get all these boxes. And then we lost Aiko a couple of years ago, and we still had another 100 boxes we had to find places for. So they're at Cal State Dominguez Hills in an archival project. And maybe some of you that are Japanese American have experienced this with elders in your family, but Aiko had tablet after tablet of every phone call she ever made. Every phone call she ever made. And that's the kind of person she was. Thank goodness she liked me, because if I would have gotten the wrong side of Lisa or Aiko, that would have been terrible. They would never quit until they were actually ruined. So she was an extraordinary person, absolutely extraordinary, as with everybody else in that film that played such a critical role in all of this unfolds.
Thank you.
So you called her a piece of work, and after your description, I just keep thinking, this is my kind of person. Reminds me of my own mother. So, nobody's perfect? I don't know what I'm supposed to say about that. Okay, so, God bless her. So I have a couple of points, and actually this is the first time I've had an opportunity to see the film, and so I'm so excited, and I have these little journals and bad handwriting, so I scribbled out a couple of things as I was watching it. You know, what I bring to this actually is, I've been at Santa Clara actually this fall, it will be 30 years, I guess. I started in the fall of 1990. I came of age as a lawyer in the 1980s in the Bay Area as this wonderful and actually even then legendary, much talked about team of lawyers led by Dale MINAMI in the 1980s. We're doing the coram nobis case in the Northern District of California. So really from that point on, the 80s, when I heard the Korematsu case, because it was really a footnote when I was in law school, it was discussed for probably only one legal principle of black letter law. From that time on, through becoming a law professor, teaching the Korematsu case, having the opportunity as a board member and then the chair of the ACLU of Northern California, I had the opportunity to know Fred and Catherine Korematsu. And that was beginning in the late 80s as I became very active in the ACLU. And they were tremendous people and tremendous civil libertarians. I talk of them as a team, but it was really Fred, of course, who made the appearances, who is in that famous photo of him with Rosa Parks being honored at the ACLU, going out to speak about racial profiling and animus against Muslims and Arabs and through 9/11. He was incredibly heroic through the end of his life. I think based on an understanding, a very deep understanding of what had happened to him as a very young man. I think he was 19, right, when he was arrested. And contextualizing that and realizing the connections among people of color, among people who were marginalized. So I think in my blood, that was partly what drew me to teach constitutional law and to continue to teach it into this almost 30 years, when it's not a very easy or uplifting course to teach, actually. A personal thing that I want to mention, I come from an interracial marriage of a Japanese immigrant who was born in 1923 and immigrated to the United States in 1952. And an African-American Army sergeant who was stationed in Yokohama, Japan in the late 1940s through 1952, which is where they met and married, and had my oldest sister and then moved to the United States. And only later did I realize, wow, you know, I really hit the jackpot. I have a lineage of two racial groups who were treated absolutely horribly when they married and were growing up. And so, in a way, you know, that makes me posthumously, since they're both gone, very proud of them in a way that I never realized when they were alive, because they went through so much more. And so one of the messages that I think it's really important for young people to learn, and the young people in the movie get it, is to look at the suffering and the bravery and courage of people before us and realize how strong you had to be when you did not have social media supporting your struggle. You did not, it was lonely and isolating. And so I really thank you for making this movie, this like fresh, brand new movie to give us this message. More particularly as a constitutional law professor, I really zeroed in on the amount of time we spent on the overreach of executive power. And that has very much to do with what is going on today. And without getting into discussions of the impeachment hearings or the executive orders, like the Muslim ban, you know, I do want to point out some things that we really need to be vigilant about. I think it is very widespread, even among the American public, you know, not just in our bubble, the Bay Area, that we have an unusual president. that he asserts executive power very broadly and very brazenly, he may very well, I shouldn't say this, prevail and win re-election. I won't say that. I didn't say that. But what we don't realize, I think, is that he is almost a cartoon character example of the overreach of executive power, and we do need to pay more attention to it. But Franklin Roosevelt was a liberal hero. He appointed justices to the United States Supreme Court who were in the majority vote upholding internment, and they were liberals on other issues. Earl Warren, as the movie points out, in much greater depth than I had known before, including his posthumous publications. It's important to know that these were people who, on other issues, were very liberal. And so what is it about the mindset of racism and xenophobia that makes it excusable for people to say, oh, but this is different because? So, finally, and very quickly, the notion of reparations and apology, which is discussed in the current day, Ta-Nehisi Coates' article and other discussions of the African American experience. It was remarkable when Reagan signed that piece of legislation, and the monetary payments were not nearly enough. But Neil Cockle, my understanding is that when he was the Solicitor General, he issued an apology on behalf of the Solicitor General's office. We can never stop apologizing for historical wrongs. So thank you for interviewing him and teaching us all these lessons.
And then I just wanted to do a quick thank you, quick shout out and coda to the film. We thank Gordon for helping finance this, as well as the community groups and Santa Clara University. The shout out is to the Korematsus who are here tonight. This is Fred's nephew and grandnephew, and Ellen is standing right over there is helping out. And the coda is just after the Korematsu case, and it's not shown as much in the film because you just can't show everything, is that Gordon Hirabayashi's case went to a full trial in Seattle, and they had to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal after appeal to finally get both of his convictions overturned. Miyasui's case went up on appeal, but unfortunately he died before it was resolved, so he never got the final vindication that Gordon and Min got. And one last shout out was District Court Judge Ed Davos over here, a friend of mine. I'm glad to see him here too, because he's part of that same group of people like Meryl and Al Patel who have made courageous rulings that we applaud.
We have so many special guests here that we basically filled up the first few rows of special guests. So yeah, and thank you all so much for being here. It's really amazing. I have a lot of questions here, so we'll see how many we can get through, but there's two of them that are towards the same thing, so I want to touch on that first. What are your plans to make sure that this film is distributed more broadly and that people will get to see it, especially people who don't know about incarceration?
Well, thank you for asking that. As a matter of fact, I'm just in the process of launching our educational distribution campaign. When we started this film, our whole goal was to get this in schools, universities, law schools, and wherever possible that it become required viewing for students, because as the young people touched upon in the film, and I work with young people, by the way, I've done that for over 30 years, and I repeatedly hear from them that they are not taught this information in schools. And what they are taught is a very glossed over version of what really happened. And so, unfortunately, today we have generations of young people growing up in this country who have no idea this ever happened. And to me, that's very sad. And I was sharing earlier a story about my daughter, my very strong-willed and opinionated daughter. When she was in high school, she came home one day, and she was very upset. And she told us that they had a discussion about World War II that day in history class, and that the teacher told the class that the incarceration camps that Japanese Americans were in were like summer camps. where everybody played baseball and went to dances, and so and you know, he apologized, of course, but that unfortunately is the kind of information that many young people are being exposed to today. So I'm hoping very much to launch my educational distribution campaign as broadly as possible. If anybody here is interested, I have information that I can share with you later.
Thank you so much. These are two kind of maybe quicker questions that we can get through that I think are very important. How did the incarceration impact identity of groups labeled as Japanese during the time? For example, like Koreans, Taiwanese, people who they thought might have been Japanese. Can anyone answer that question?
I don't know.
You know,
I do know this, that a number of Chinese Americans would wear badges. I'm not Japanese. So it did create fear because that we all look alike kind of stereotype. And so I know that for a fact. Koreans were not here in numbers quite at that time, so I don't think it affected them en masse as much because it was way before the 1965 Immigration Act that liberalized immigration.
At the Japanese American National Museum in downtown LA, there was actually a discussion, or maybe it was a pamphlet, on how to spot a Japanese person as opposed to a Chinese person.
And that was in Life magazine. Life magazine
Yeah.
published that they did these biometrics of what their faces looked like, the measurements, the way their eyes looked. It was really racist.
Yeah. So, so the next question here is, what is your opinion about the fact that the ACLU expressly refused to authorize their attorneys to oppose what was happening? And I'll read the rest of it, but I'd be curious to hear what you all have to say about it.
Margaret was on the board. You can.
Never ask me a question. I'll try to be very quick. This is the 100th anniversary of the National ACLU, and my friend and colleague Marina Shea has also been on the national board for many years. It has been a subject of a lot of discussion over many years, the extent to which the national organization would admit or acknowledge that it hadn't just sort of sidestepped it, it had actually refused to take the case. And there were various reasons why. Friends of Franklin Roosevelt were on the national board, cite, he was a liberal on other issues. But Northern California, we're so proud of this affiliate because it is historically distinct. And this year, the 100th anniversary, there is a book that's, it could be published any moment because this is the big anniversary year. And it has a chapter by our colleagues Elaine Ellenson and Stan Yogi of the ACLU, who wrote, I think, the children's book about Fred Korematsu. But anyway, this chapter, look for this book, is specifically about the story of the rift between Northern California and National, because it was a real rift. And actually, some vindication was when I was on the national board and had the chance to introduce the winners of the Roger Baldwin Medal of Liberty, which is the ACLU National's highest big cash attached award, which we gave to the three, Hirabayashi, Yasui, and Korematsu, and Fred was still alive. It was the National that got up and apologized and awarded this medal. And Catherine Korematsu, who was also the greatest piece of work ever. Good work, I would call her a piece of work. When I called her to tell her that the medal was going to be awarded, and I said, the National ACLU. And I said, it's called the Roger Baldwin Medal of Liberty after the former director of the ACLU. And she laughed and she said, Roger Baldwin was the one who didn't want to take Fred's case. So, history gets better sometimes.
One thing about the ACLU, remember that they did participate eventually. They filed briefs in the United States Supreme Court on behalf of Gordon, Fred, and Min. It was
okay.
It was after.
I should be easier.
After the Northern District was willing to resist and be kicked out of the entire ACLU, and also no national group stood up for Japanese Americans. We were alone, except for one, anecdotally, the Quakers. And Norman Thomas of the Socialist Party. The Communists didn't stand up. The National Lawyers Guild didn't stand up.
Wow, really?
Really, And the difference between that, which is the lesson of political power, is that in 1988, when redress was passed and Japanese Americans received an apology and $20,000, they had a rainbow coalition of all races, all colors, lobbying for that. And that's the lesson of political power that you can see in that history of Japanese Americans.
Thank you both so much. Another question that was asked by two people. How do we depoliticize the branches so the checks and balances work? Executive, legislative, judicial. I know it's a huge question, and I just want to throw in that I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan organization, so I feel like these questions come up a lot for me, so I'm curious what you all think about it.
You know, this issue of checks and balances, I know I'm in law school, and I'm not an attorney, I'm a politician, but I'm an activist for a long, long time, over 50 years. The real checks and balances is the people, not the three branches of government. And that's what I think people better understand about not only the movie, not only about the coram nobis case, not only about these. This is something that took place over a long time of people doing things related to political power, using law and the tools that you have in the field of law, politics. I was in the state legislature when people came to me and said, we have a bill to make Fred Korematsu Day. Can you carry the bill? So I carried the bill, but I told them I wouldn't just carry a Fred Korematsu bill. I wish we could have called it Gordon Hirabayashi, Minyasui, and Fred. But what I added and I demanded was it had to have civil liberties in the Constitution in the title of the day, because this ain't about a birthday. This ain't about one person's birthday. It's about something so much bigger. And the courage that Fred and Min and Gordon had to stand up, that's the underpinning of the story, but it's so much bigger. And the reason they brought me the bill was because I had already passed the bill to get honorary degrees conferred on Japanese Americans who were pulled out of college because of going to camp. And in both bills, I did not get one dissenting vote. And we had already had new Tea Party members of the legislature in California at that time. We didn't get one dissenting vote. And the reason I bring that up isn't because of the ability I had to pass legislation, but it was because of the work and the decades of work that the Japanese American community and our friends had invested over time to educate the community. And what John is saying is true. I'm amazed at how you run into people and they don't know things. I'm amazed. I mean, you've seen the man on the street kind of stories on television where they talk to someone on a street corner and they just have no clue about anything. But people need to know that you don't make these things happen just in a court of law. You make these happen whether it's the 1964 or 65 Voting Rights, Civil Rights Act. If you're talking about ending wars like Vietnam, it's all done with a movement. So 20 years before they passed redress and reparations, we went on the first pilgrimage to Manzanar. John mentioned pilgrimage to Tule Lake. At that time, we knew nothing. The Japanese American community did not want to talk about it. They were so pissed that us young people were going to do this. They were absolutely upset. And we were filled with piss and vinegar at that time. We wanted to be Black Panthers. We wanted to be all these other different kinds of things. But then we met this guy, Yuri Wada from San Francisco, who went with us on the first pilgrimage. And Yuri said, you know, we get it, you're young, you're full of shit. But you better realize that what's happening here, and the reason no one wants to talk about it and is upset that you're bringing it up, is because it's like a rape victim. You don't want to recount the violation. You don't want to put that on Front Street. And when we went the first time, myself and Victor Shibata, we went to Manzanar because we had this idea. We needed to march somewhere. There was a Poor People's March attached to the Civil Rights March in Washington, D.C. with Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and on and on and on. And The farm workers had just marched to Sacramento to talk about the plight of the workers in the fields. We said, damn it, as Asians, we gotta march somewhere. We gotta march somewhere to galvanize this new social justice movement. And we said, what about those camps? We didn't know anything about the camps because nobody talked about it in the community. Nobody talked about it. And we went that first time, Victor and I went, we were on 395, we had heard that there's gonna be a green building and that's gonna be the old auditorium for the camp. We knew it was in between Lone Pine and Independence. And when we got up there, we saw this sign that said Manzanar Road. We stole the sign. But what we did is on 395, we turned right and we went east. We went east. And when we went east, we saw this old dirt road that I know I'm a bit long-winded, but it's some asphalt roads. And with our limited knowledge, we started thinking, this must have been the roads between the barracks and so forth. And there was this pickup truck that started coming to us. Just in the distance with a cloud of dust. And as it got closer, you could see the gun racks and the shotguns in the window. And they pulled up on us with cowboy hats and they rolled out and said, what are you boys doing? We said, we're not boys. We're men, and we're here to see the camps where people like you put us in 1920. And we went on and on. They started laughing, which really upset. They said, oh, are you looking for the camps where the Japanese were put in? I said, yeah. Well, you're on the wrong side of 395. It's on the other side. But that's how ignorant we were. But we knew, as we came across graves, that's why the Manzanar pilgrims at the cemetery. We came across mounds in a obelisk monument. And we walked and we found these uncovered junkyards with plates that were all labeled from war, U.S. Army, issue 1942. It was like an archaeological discovery that was in a shallow grave, and the wind in the Owens Valley, if you know the area, blew the sand off and started to reveal the story. And ever since then, it started out as a story with nothing written on the pages. And the pages have been filled and filled by the work of Dale and so many of the number of attorneys on the coram nobis teams, and there was 3 teams. You know, it's amazing, and it was an important thing for us, and I think it really reflects an understanding that Peter Irons had, that we need the Japanese Americans to argue this case. We didn't need other people coming and do it for us. We need the Japanese Americans to argue this case.
Warren, I'd like to get through a couple of
Yeah, I'm sorry. All this to say, it takes a movement.
Yes.
It takes a movement.
Thank you. So this is an important question and very relevant to today. The overturning of these cases seem to turn on evidence that SCOTUS was lied to. Does that often happen? Is the Trump administration lying about the travel ban, the U.S. Census citizenship question, et cetera? Does that mean we've learned nothing?
Well, I'll let Dale elaborate on this, but I think it's important to, and it was touched upon at the end of the film, but the whole case that was argued in support of the travel ban was done so based upon a classified report that the justices never got to see. And that the President of the United States claimed national security, and that this information was classified based on that. And so the ruling was based on information they never saw. Information that they say validates the need for this, and yet nobody has ever actually seen it. And so I'll leave it to you to imagine whether or not that evidence is actually true, because the fact of the matter is that no actual evidence has come forward to support that position.
Sure. Okay, so I'm still going to answer the last question and this one with the same thought, which is that often, the last question was about the three branches and about the checks and balances, which is very important. But it's really important to think about what is sometimes called the fourth branch, the press, and the incredible importance of freedom of the press in interrogating secrecy and lies of the government. Today, it is very apparent that there is a concerted effort to squelch independent journalism and investigative journalism. And that's part of the First Amendment's freedom of the press. And if you have a situation in which the branches of government are dysfunctional, which arguably happened at the time of Korematsu, and many people think is happening today, you really need the press, or else you're never going to have the history to discover and to have it documented as it is in film.
A point on Warren's position that I think is absolutely critical is that you can't depend on your government to preserve your rights. They're not gifts, they're challenges. And you may be a lawyer, but you're also a citizen. And you've got to exercise your right to citizenship. It means protesting, it means organizing, it means pressing on these institutions to do the right thing. So I think when Warren and I, and mostly Warren influenced me greatly, about the power of the people, which sounds like a cliche, but it's also necessary for us to exert our own power in our own way and not rely on just politicians. You can't rely on the courts, as we know, and you can't rely on the president now, of course. So that leaves us with what? Where is power derived from? And it derives from the people organizing. And I truly believe what Warren's saying is maybe the most important point in this whole discussion here today. I think the lies that you're talking about, it's become normalized. Trump has normalized lying. And so everybody does it now, and it's disgusting. And it's distorting our whole cultural viewpoint, our values. You see all the politicians are always lying now, even more so. Not more, of course. But those lies that were, revealed in the film, which I thought was really important, was a sign to us that we need to not only hold our institutions accountable, but we need to exercise our activity, our own rights as citizens, not just as somebody relying upon some other institutions to protect us.
Thank you. I just want to comment that we only have 2 minutes left, but I'd like to ask the audience for your permission to go an extra 15 minutes. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. Please feel free if you need to leave. I want to give you the opportunity and we want to hold you captive, but I do want to make sure that we get to hear from these amazing panelists. So, with a conservative Supreme Court and many Trump appointees in lower courts, where do you see civil rights rulings and decisions going in the coming years? Are you pessimistic or optimistic? Randy, really?
Why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm not totally pessimistic. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did a long time. We need the president, and you said we need people like Judge Ed Davila. And by the way, the Northern District of California, their judges have been stalwart against the Trump's decisions. They have banned more of Trump's decisions probably any district in this whole country. And while they get overruled quite often because we have a biased Supreme Court, I'm proud that they have the courage to make those kind of decisions. So I'm super pessimistic unless we change that political system, which is why this election in 2020 is the most important election. Maybe not in your life unless you're young, but it's for your children's lives. Because we're not talking just about racism, poverty, immigration. We're talking about climate issues. And these are existential issues that if we don't change them, this election, I honestly I hate to feel like Chicken Little, but I think the sky is falling.
Well, let me try to be a little more optimistic. But I will start by agreeing with you very much that the federal courts and the Supreme Court have done a lot of damage, and that the composition, the percentage of the current federal court system indicates that the courts are lost for a generation. So I'm just going to start there, go uphill. Okay, positive things. Grassroots political organizing. a recognition that, it's not just our rah-rah 1960s and 70s power to the people, but there is a tremendous amount of activism going on among young people. For those of you who are in law school, don't think that that's passed you by. You can plug into it. You can be lawyers. There are social movements. And I'm very optimistic about that, because that seems to be a voice that is influencing eventually who gets elected to political office and what changes happen in that realm. I was talking to a friend yesterday who's very much into mediation and alternative dispute resolution and restorative justice. And I said to her, well, maybe that's a solution to the fact that the courts are lost to us. I mean, there are state courts. There are definitely state courts in various states that are good. But, the depressing nature of the federal courts to me indicates that civil rights and civil liberties victories are really going to occur increasingly outside the courts. And so that involves the need for very creative thinking in the areas of restorative justice, in the areas of political organizing and mobilization.
Do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Be optimistic.
I will be optimistic, and I want to just, from the comments that were made earlier, I did want to share and just bring to light the fact that, right now as we sit here in this room, there are American-style concentration camps being operated in this country. And to their point, I'm part of an effort that is organizing a national pilgrimage and march to close those camps that is going to take place in Washington, D.C., June 5th to 7th. And, I know it seems like a very daunting commitment to have to travel all the way to Washington, D.C. to be part of a march and a protest. But I go back to some of the comments made earlier. To me, one of the greatest lessons that has to be remembered about the incarceration of Japanese Americans is that no one stood up for us. Okay? And I can't help but think how history might have been different if someone had. And so I think it is incumbent upon us to participate in any way we can, whether we can travel over there, whether we can support the effort. And so I please want to really encourage you to seek me out afterwards, and I can share information about that. But to me, there are seminal moments in our history that forever changed the course of what happens in this country, and I think we have an opportunity before us to do that.
Yeah, and to that point, there was actually a question about that. It seems the U.S. is also seeing a parallel between the internment camps and rhetoric on Japanese American in the 1940s and Latinx people today. What are ways we believe we can fight against repeating history, and what legal actions are required to stop such actions? And I think one of those ways, what you just said, is standing up, speaking out, marching, showing our support, and really showing up. Are there other ways that you all would like to share?
A concern I have relative, I am a 60s, 70s guy, that's where I started. A concern I have about what's going on today is this trend toward doctrinaire thinking. That there's only one way to look at it. We're getting real purist in some areas. There's no room for failure. There's no room for new ideas. Cancel culture, a lot of things that people are saying. I'm a little concerned about this purist movement. I think what we have, particularly with young people, I'm a senior fellow at the Luskin School at UCLA, and I see these young people, they're great. Heart's in the right place, creative. We need to really be creative about our social movement. We're going to talk about legislation to repeal Proposition 209, which is related to affirmative action, again this coming year. I'm telling you, we don't need to go back to 209 and affirmative. We need to look at new ways of the issue of diversity and equity, equality. And that's going to come from a lot of new people, young people. Don't be afraid to be creative. Don't think it's got to fit a certain cubbyhole. It's got to be a round peg in that round hole. If you got a square peg, let's take a look at it. I mean, I'm real concerned about new ideas because the tools that young people have, tools that I just can't even fathom, that my granddaughter picks it up and just automatically can manipulate. It's really amazing what can be done. And new ideas, new ways of dealing with old issues. We got to come up with new solutions, not old solutions for old ideas. We got to have new ones. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited about what's available to people. I'm excited about the creativity. I'm excited about people coming forward. I think it's a great time. I think President Trump era is just sort of the last gasping breath. They're holding on for dear life. That's where they're lying and all this other crap they're doing. This is the last dying gasp. We just can't let this opportunity pass. I don't care who you're supporting in the primary. Only thing I want to know is you're going to support whoever we end up with your whole blood, sweat, and tears. That's all I want to know. And whoever turns out to be, so be it. But we got some work to do.
As a young person, and I also just want to comment on how intergenerational our crowd is tonight. So I think that really shows that generations are coming together and they care about this issue, and I think that's very important. Another question I got is, due to Japanese Americans receiving reparations, do you think this adds to the argument in favor of reparations for African Americans?
Yeah. I remember over 20 years ago being at a talk over at Worcester College in Ohio, and I went to a Black Reparations Forum that I was asked to speak at, and it occurred to me that if you have this kind of injustice against a group that's systematic, that in order to get some reconciliation, you have to do something restorative. And for the longest time, I thought affirmative action was part of the restorative justice. To make sure that African Americans who were deprived of so many things during their life could get some kind of help for equality. And I think the important thing is that there's two questions here that people conflate and confuse all the time. One, are they entitled to reparations? The answer is yes. Two, how do you implement that? That's the difficult one. People are raising that as the roadblock or the blockade or the obstacle to ever getting reparations for African Americans. But that confuses the two. There's different ways you can give reparations, but that's a different question than do they deserve it? And the answer, in my mind, is absolutely.
I think there's two things to build upon with the new approach to this. One is the issue of reparations and redress that Japanese Americans were a part of. The other one is what took place in South Africa about reconciliation. I think as we talk about this issue, we don't look at it from the back end, we look at it from the front end. How can we bring these two things together? Because just giving people $20,000 didn't solve the problem. It bought a lot of Toyota Camrys. That's what it did. And I don't think reparations alone is going to solve. It's going to take a reconciliation. What they did in South Africa after apartheid, a whole nother way of dealing with this. And it's not going to just be money. That's just not the solution to the problem. It's got to be a reconciliation with part of it being reparations. That's what I think. Because what we're talking about, it used to be very easy for me just to blame everything on white people. And then when we got to be the majority in the state of California, I thought, well, if we all the people of color go out and get one person each, we could solve the problem. I'll go out and get one white person each. Never mind. Anyway, point being that that's not the problem. The issue is reconciliation. Anyway, those two things I think are two good things that we could work with and move forward on.
Just quickly, so I've been sort of pondering this because of a comment made in the film. I think about money isn't enough, right? And what about all the pain? And the quick answer is yes, I certainly think there's a strong argument for Black reparations. But along the lines of what Warren has said, the harm is so much greater. On Saturday, we had a mock trial of the Korematsu case in the courtroom here in the law school. And afterwards, we had a lunch, and the daughter of Fred Korematsu was there, and a number of us were talking about reparations and about the Civil Liberties Act that gave payments. And it really, it led to a discussion of the losses that were so much greater, not just the emotional pain and the shunning and the discrimination, but the property dispossession was unbelievable. And we don't know enough about that. I mean, the people at the event, at the luncheon, were telling stories that I had never heard of here in Northern California of the property dispossession. So, you know, yeah, I guess I think reparations is not nearly enough to address the harm.
Thank you all so much. I want to make sure we have enough time for kind of closing thoughts. You know, one thing I wanted to say as a Japanese American, I think that these events are so important for me because it's a really good time for me to sort of process that trauma, you know, that I still feel from watching the film. Every time I cry, every time I watch the film, I've seen it twice now, and you know, I think for the Japanese Americans in the audience, I hope that this helps you process your own feelings about the incarceration. I'd like for you all, I know I didn't get to all the questions, I encourage you to speak to the panelists afterwards, but I'd like to hear kind of your final thoughts about this and anything you want to leave us with here today. I think any messages you want to share to the next generation or advice would be appreciated. And again, just to say thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to the co-sponsors and for the panelists for coming and spending your time here. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, again, thank you for coming, and I'll just leave you with a little bit more on what I was just sharing. Is I think that for our community, I know for many, many years, right, we've had our Day of Remembrances, and we've done what we could to make sure this country didn't forget about what it did to our community. But I feel that this moment in time is different. I think that today is a day to act and to be engaged, and that in order to preserve the democracy of this country, we need vigilance. We need people in the streets, holding signs, coming together, and being part of a movement to take back this country. And I hope that you all will be part of that effort.
Well, I'll be quick, and let me make sure I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga. Okay, so this movie taught me a lot about her. And she's not a lawyer, so I've always sort of thought of this issue through the lens of the law and Peter Irons and what the lawyers did. And this movie, the first time I've seen it, it strikes me as a kind of a Valentine to her, which I'm just very touched by that. And the meaning of, as Peter Irons calls, this petite Japanese American woman, very petite. And I zeroed in on her and I thought, yeah, you know, that's who saves the world. So, thank you.
Speaking of Michael, there's a really excellent film that was made called Rebel with a Cause about Aiko, and that's I'm always a little glib about her being a piece of work. She is a piece of work. You should see this film. I mean, this is one amazing chapter and contribution, but there's a word called serendipity, and that's when you discover something by accident. But the full meaning of serendipity is what Aiko did. She saw this report on the corner of a desk, saunters over to it while this guy is ignoring her on a phone call, and she leaps through it because she's this petite, small Japanese American that's got the great smile. She's a beautiful woman. She's leaping through it, and this guy's on the phone looking at her, and he's not even suspicious. He's thinking, she said, you know, what does she know? But she's serendipitous in that she not only finds it by accident, but she knows what the fuck to do with it. That's serendipity. And the reason she knew what to do with it, which is what I would end on, is you gotta have a point of view. I don't care if you're an attorney, you're a judge, you're an activist, you gotta have a point of view. And that point of view is what you're developing here in the law school. Point of view is what all of us elders and the deacons in this church of social justice have been doing for years and years. How to look at reality, because the impeachment thing is a perfect example. They're using the law, or what they call in the law, and people are looking at the same damn thing, and they're coming up with totally different conclusions based upon their point of view. What's your point of view?
I want to thank you all for coming out again. I spoke on there, I spoke here, I didn't speak tonight, so I don't want to say much. I just want to echo what John said. I really think you need to find an inspiration, you need to find an outrage, you need to find some reason to help us move this country forward, and especially this year. And so I hope people will become activists or continue to be activists, because I think we're hitting a crisis here that is so unproportionate in my life that I'm really concerned, and I hope all of us can work together and do something to bring this country back to where it should be.
And just a quick note on that, you don't have to run for office or, you can, but just remember that you can start off with just registering people to vote, or making sure that you are registered to vote and that you are an informed voter. These little steps really kind of get you on your path. And that's how I started getting involved, which is voter registration. Again, thank you all so much for being here this evening. Thank you for staying late. Please keep an eye out for our future events. The president of the ACLU is going to come here to speak, to talk about civil liberties in the Trump era. I want to thank again our co-sponsors. Thank you all again for being here this night, and thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate having you here. It's really an incredible opportunity to get to interview really my role models and people who I really look up to. So thank you all.
Thank you.